Hey guys, how's it going? It's your boy MiG-15bis here, and today we are going to be looking at the MiG-15. Unfortunately, as you may notice, I don't have any gameplay of it. I'm going to be talking about it in the DCS aspect because that's the one I've got experience with, and of course, as far as I'm aware, it's pretty much as accurate as you can get to the real thing. So hopefully I'll find some footage somewhere of the MiG-15 flying as I talk over this. I do have a partial script. It took a while to compile the information. There's a lot of information I probably missed because there is so much information on the MiG-15. It is one of the most iconic jet aircraft ever produced. Of course, because I'm in quarantine, I haven't got much. I've got loads of time, so I'll probably do all of the MiGs. As I'm working up through the MiGs on DCS, I'm going to get the MiG-21 hopefully tomorrow. But so far I've done MiG-15 and MiG-19, and then I'm going to get MiG-21, and then hopefully I'll learn the MiG-23. Super excited to talk about the MiG-23 and MiG-21 once I get to that. I want to do MiG-19 first, but I'm not going to do the MiG-17. I'll talk about it in this video, but there's not much to talk about. I don't know much about it, and it's not that much different from the MiG-15 as far as I'm aware. All I know is it's basically got an afterburner, and that's the only difference as far as I'm aware. It's also got an extra wing fence. I'll get into wing fences later in this video because the wing fences are actually quite important for the MiG-15. But yeah, basically MiG-17 has more thrust. It's got basically the exact same speed, but it can accelerate a lot more because it's got afterburner. As far as I'm aware, it's the exact same engine and everything as the MiG-15bis. I'm not going to talk about earlier variants of the MiG-15 because they're not... Like, the MiG-15bis is like the ideal variant of the MiG-15. So anyway, let's get into this. So, since I'm going to be going on about lots of Russian aircraft, because personally I find the Warsaw Communist Pact kind of aircraft a lot more interesting. I guess because they're more dangerous. Other than the electric lightning, I love the English electric lightning. I really like to see or fly one of those, but anyway. So basically, with the Russians, you have four main aircraft bureaus that design and make these aircraft. So you've got Yakolev, which do Yak. So anything of the Yak designation is made by Yakolev, the Yakolev Bureau. So you've got Sukhoi, which make the SU variants. Unlike Yak, which don't really do aircraft anymore, they do like cargo and fuel tankers and stuff like that. Sukhoi still make stuff like what's the most iconic one? Su-25, Su-30, Su-33. I think they do an Su-35 if I remember right. I might be thinking of the MiG-35. Do they do a MiG-35? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. So Sukhoi would make what most people consider the A-10 competitor, and they also make fighter aircraft. So the Su-25 would be the A-10 variant, but no, they're not actually the same. If I ever do the Su-25, or I'll probably do Sukhoi in general, just because I don't know that much about them. I'll explain to you why the Su-25 and the A-10 are technically in two different roles. The A-10 is way bigger than the Su-25. So completely different capabilities. You also have the Aleutian Bureau. Again, they don't really do fighter aircraft anymore. They're most known for their World War II IL-2 fighter bomber. I guess they're a dive bomber, really. That's what they're really mainly known for. They don't really do fighters anymore. Fighters are mainly Sukhoi and Mikoyan. And Mikoyan, of course, do MiG. Oh, and Aleutian, anything with... I don't know if I said this already, but anything with IL before it's at the start of its name is made by Aleutian, and with Mikoyan, it's MiG. So the MiG-15bis, as far as I'm aware, started flying around the 1950s. I couldn't find an exact date specifically for the bis variant. But we know for a fact that the first kill was the 22nd of December 1950, so right at the end of 1950. And that was a F. I'm pretty sure that's an F. My notes are wrong. F-86A, not F. So basically one of the first F-86s. Okay, I will probably get flagged for this, but the NATO reporting name of the MiG-15bis is faggot, spelled with a single G, and it's not the swear word against gay people. It's an archaic unit of measurement. It basically means bundle. Yeah, again, archaic English measurement. But yeah. What else is there to say about the background? Oh, I guess one of the most important things to talk about is the jet engine. So, I'll talk about generations a little bit later, but to put it simply, the MiG-15bis is Russia's, I believe that their first, well, the MiG-15 in general was Russia's second generation fighter. So, up until then, yeah, basically up until the MiG-15, Russia had been using copycats of the German World War II engines that they captured during the war. So they weren't very good, and they basically all the Russians did was change the aerodynamic designs of their jet aircraft beforehand. They weren't very successful because of this, because of course they were stuck using World War II jet engines while everyone else was developing newer, better engines. So basically, of course, we all know that after World War II, the British government got handed over to Labour. Labour won the election, and of course, Labour decided it'd be a good idea to give Russia access to our Rolls-Royce jet engine factory. I mean, obviously, we didn't know what was going to happen next. They didn't realise it. No one realised it. But basically, the Russians gained access to our factory, and of course the Russians didn't have access to any decent jet tech. So basically, I can't remember who it was against who, but one of the Russian guys basically did a bet against one of the heads of Rolls-Royce and said, if I beat you at a pool game, you should allow us to make a deal with you, basically, to gain access to your jet engines. Surprisingly, we lost, which is very disappointing. Very disappointing as English men. But basically, yeah, the Russians gained access to our engines, but before we shipped them out, somehow the Russians already had the materials ready, even though they weren't supposed to know how our engines were made, like what our engines were made of. So basically, what happens is, even after we lost this pool game, the Russians decided to stick sponges on the soles of their shoes and walk around the milling machines to pick up all the metal shavings. They picked them up in their sponge soles. They took it back to their labs and they analysed these metal shavings to figure out what these engines were made of. So when they actually got the schematics for the engines, they could easily reverse engineer it. All they had to do was figure out how it was designed, and they already had the materials, so they could just build it straight away. So yeah, arguably the Cold War would be completely different if we hadn't lost that pool game. Quite embarrassing, to be quite honest. But the engine was called I'm probably going to butcher this. I completely suck at Russian. I can't do Russian at all. The Klimov VK1. Which was based off the Rolls-Royce Nene engine. One of the key things to note about the Klimov is it had an awfully long spool time. So compared to any Western counterpart, it took ages and ages for the engine to spool up, which arguably put it at a disadvantage when you wanted to go when you want to accelerate quickly, because it takes a good 10 seconds for your engine to spool up, while a Western variant would take like 5 seconds. Of course, Western variants were pretty bad, shockingly bad as well at the time, because of course it's still early jet technology. When I was researching into the MiG-15bis, I thought it was quite interesting that they were planning to put a 57mm cannon onto the aircraft, along with two 23mm cannons. So in the end, the final variant had a 37mm and two 23mm. To put that into perspective, the 810 Warhog has I believe a 30 or 33mm Gatling gun. So it had a bigger gun than the 810 Warhog. Didn't have many rounds. I believe it only had like 40 rounds. But imagine the 57mm cannon. That is more than some tanks have. So it is a pretty ridiculous cannon. I'm assuming that they didn't go for the 57mm cannon just because of the muzzle velocity of the shot wasn't very high, so it would probably be useless. And the fire rate would have probably been abysmal. I mean, the 37mm is pretty bad, but oh my god. And then the number of rounds you would have been able to take, it would probably been like 20 something rounds, something like that. So yeah, not very good. What else have I got on my notes? The MiG-15bis is mostly known for fighting in the Korean War. Interestingly, the Russians decided to, because of course this is during the Cold War, and the Russians didn't want to announce that they were fighting the Americans because it was against Korea and America. So what the Russians did is they sent all of their Russian soldiers out, their Russian pilots, but they didn't, and they forced them to speak Korean, and they didn't allow them. Well, they just denied any existence, and they flew under the Korean or Chinese flag, which, well, NATO realised pretty quickly that, of course, it was the Russians because the pilots weren't speaking Korean, they were speaking Russian over the radio, so it was pretty obvious that it was the Russians that were flying. But I think, to be quite honest, it was probably a good idea of the Russians to do this, and I mean, there was no chance of the Koreans winning the Korean War or the Chinese because they just didn't have the pilot experience. I mean, they were transferring over from prop aircraft, so they had no experience. So, I mean, it was a good call for the Russians to do what they did. Was it correct? No, but oh well. We also saw MiG-15s fight over China as well. The Americans trying to do bombing campaigns against China's borders, especially factories and such. I can't do Egyptian names either, but the Suez Canal crisis was another place at the MiG-15bis. The Taiwan Straits crisis. They also fought over Vietnam, although not that much because you started to see the MiG-17 and I believe the MiG-19 as well. I'm pretty sure the MiG-19 was there as well. What else have we got on my notes? Excluding conflicts, there were also one-off engagements. The final one that is recorded is over Bulgaria in 1955. And I also have noted that the first man to space was also killed by a MiG-15 UTI, which is, I believe, a training reconnaissance variant. He was killed in March 1968, during a training flight. Apparently it was due to poor visibility and pretty shit communication from ground control. Current operators, so you may be surprised to hear, but North Korea and Guinea-Bissau still fly the MiG-15bis. Oh my god, it's a very old aircraft basically, still flying today. The US Air Force actually still fly the MiG-15bis. They still use them as training variants to get pilots to understand what the adversary's design philosophies was in the early wars. Our former operators, Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Angola, Bulgaria, Cambodia, China, Republic of Congo, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Egypt, Finland, Guinea, Hungary, Indonesia, Iraq, oh my god, I can't pronounce that, Khmer Republic, Mali, Mongolia, Morocco, Mozambique, Nigeria, North Vietnam, North Yemen, Pakistan, Poland, Romania, Somalis, Somali. I don't know. I can't pronounce that either. That's an African country, Republic of Somali. Yeah, Horn of Africa is bordered by Ethiopia. Okay, well you guys can figure out how to pronounce that yourselves. South Yemen, Soviet Union, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Syria, Tanzania, Uganda. United States also had it in their aggressor air force. Vietnam, Yemen, and Argentina actually operates it as a civilians operate it. Yeah, one private Czechoslovakian built MiG-15 was operated by the Polish Air Force, and it was rebuilt, and they still fly it. Okay, very cool. But as you can see, there's a lot of MiG-15s. The Russians were really good at supplying people. They made way more aircraft than the Americans. So the Russians built 13,130. If I can find the F-86, the F-86 had 9,860. So the Americans are actually keeping up quite considerably. Oh, and also 4,180 were built under license, meaning they weren't built in the USSR, probably built in China, because I know China had lots of contracts with the Russians until they backstabbed them, but that's the story for another day. Who else would build them? India, probably India. I would say India and China would be the two main ones. I'm sure there's Warsaw Pact countries that probably produced as well. I wouldn't be surprised if like Czechoslovakia or someone had a factory or something like that. Next on my notes is the wing sweep. So as I make more of these videos, you'll start to notice that the wings sweep further and further back, which means you have less lift at low speeds, which makes it a lot harder to land. As I have learned, personally, I find the MiG-19 the hardest aircraft to land out of any aircraft. It was really hard to learn to land. I'm sure the MiG-21 is going to be worse because it's a delta wing and it's a ridiculous wing sweep. But yeah, 35 degrees wing sweep, which is pretty considerable versus a NATO, well not NATO, a World War II aircraft. World War II aircraft was basically 0 degrees or close to 0 degrees, so now I have in my notes that I have to talk about generations. So generations of aircraft are one of those things that is very muddy, and who you ask, it's going to change how you classify a generation of aircraft. I personally like the way Richard P. Hallion has classified generations, so this is all the way up to 5th generation. There's arguably 4 plus 4.5 generation. I'll talk about a bit about that later, but basically Richard P. Hallion's, I won't talk about all the generations because there's no need to, because we're only going up to 2nd generation really, but basically 1st generation is your Gloucester Meteors, your I can't remember whatever the American variant was. I think that's the P-80, the ME-262, the Heinkel 178s, stuff like that. So all of the Russian 1st generation jet aircraft, anything before the MiG-15, they were all using German jet engines from World War II. Of course, Britain and the US were 1st to 2nd generation aircraft. Although this is really important, the Russians got their hands on a lot more design experts, meaning that they had better aerodynamic designs, even though technically speaking the Western countries had better technology within their aircraft. The Russians had better performing aircrafts. What else do I have? So 2nd generation is when you start seeing more unique aircraft, when you're still subsonic, but you're starting to hit those transonic speeds. So for example, the F-86 could technically break the speed of sound, but you'd have to be going straight down. You could not break the sound barrier in a straight line, basically, with 2nd generation aircraft. You start to see radar technology. We don't see BVR, there's no BVR. We don't really see missile tech yet. The F-86 did have missile tech, but pretty shit missiles. I should do a video on missile technology as well, because that's in a whole nother field of stuff. But basically, the F-86 did have missiles, but they had terrible range, and they weren't maneuverable, so they were only ever used against bomber aircraft, so like B-29Gs and stuff like that. So late flying fortresses. Whatever, I guess the Russian Bears. I don't know if the Russian Bears were built yet, though. Those are turboprops, so no, probably not. But the second generation equivalents to the MiG-9... Oh no, I should not do that yet. First generation Russian equivalents would be Yak-15, Yak-17, MiG-9, Su-5, so those use German engines. Second generation equivalents, you've got Yak-23, Armstrong, Whitworth, Meteor, so later Meteor designs with better engines basically. F-86s, Hawker Hunters in the later years, although yes, MiG-15s are starting to get phased out. You're starting to see MiG-17s and MiG-19s, and also Supermarine Swifts. Next in my notes, I have F-86F versus MiG-15. So this is what I have the most experience with. Technically speaking, you have anything from F-86A to God knows what, but the F-86F against the MiG-15, which I guess they're technically the height of both aircraft, so, and they're the main contemporaries that saw combat in like Vietnam and Korea and all that. So basically, the problem with the F-86 is it's way bigger, it's way heavier. So even though they technically have the same engine power, both the MiG-15 and the F-86, the MiG-15 could get more speed because it was lighter, so there was not as much weight to move around, and there was less aerodynamic resistance. Guns, F-86s used 50 cals during the Korean War, which the Americans started to notice was a really, really bad idea, because you could, basically pilots were saying that they could punch holes through MiG-15s, but they weren't going down, and adding to that problem was the MiG-15 was pretty well designed, so its armour was actually pretty exceptional. Like, you could get shot in lots of places and nothing would happen. In comparison, MiG-15 had two 23mm and a 37mm, so it could do ground strikes and it could take down a F-86 in a couple of shots. Now, saying that, technically speaking, they could do the same amount of damage. I've seen videos of test pilots saying, well, technically, you could take down the same number of aircraft. The problem is the F-86, you need to land more shots, basically. So, technically speaking, that's not going to happen, so you get less kills. Another big problem so this is where designs start splitting away from East and West. So, the MiG-15 suffers considerably in adverse roll. So, when you start getting to Mach 0.92, you start rolling either to the left or the right. I find it's usually to the right. And to counteract this, you've got to basically roll to the right with the aircraft. Otherwise, the aircraft will roll even harder if you roll to the left, which is a big problem, and it's really confusing as somebody who comes from more modern aircraft. It's just really a really strange design. Again, engine technology, MiG-15 technically had the same engine. It had worse spool time though. So while you had the same thrust, the spool time was worse. So if an F-86 at the same speed as a MiG-15, a rolling start, had to suddenly accelerate, then the F-86 would have the head start because it has significantly less spool time, but in the end the MiG-15 will catch up. Another thing to note is the rate of climb, and I've noted it down somewhere in my notes, the rate of climb. So the MiG-15bis had a considerably more aggressive rate of climb, and oh my god, where has my rate of climb gone? So basically, the MiG-15bis had a rate of climb of 51.2 meters a second. Well, let me find the F-86. It's somewhere in my notes. The F-86 had a rate of climb of 45.72 meters a second. So lots of pilots were saying when they were fighting MiG-15s is that the F-86, what the MiG-15s would do is they come down, take a couple shots at you, run away with a climb, because the F-86 couldn't climb and maintain that energy that the MiG-15 could. So that was pretty devastating. So what the MiG-15 could do was have more energy basically, and it could climb faster, so it could get away easier. So, oh, and I completely forgot, I haven't put this in my notes, but the MiG-15 could turn harder. Now, it's important to note that the MiG-15 uses the pilots had no G-suits, which is a big problem. So while you could technically turn harder in the MiG-15 over the F-86F, you could G out a lot easier, so it kind of evens out. But in hard turns, in non-sustained turns, basically, the MiG-15bis had a massive advantage. You could easily get people on its nose to shoot at them. Next is Chuck Yeager. Ah, yes. So I don't know if you guys know who Chuck Yeager is, but he's a really well-renowned test pilot. I think he fought in the war as well, and he did get quite a few kills, if I remember right. I'm not 100% sure on that. But basically, the MiG-15bis nearly killed Chuck Yeager because he tried to break the speed of sound like the F-86 did by going straight down. Problem is with the MiG-15bis is you can't pull up once you start going to like Mach 0.95 or whatever. I think it was Mach 0.95, and he just couldn't pull up after that. So he couldn't break the sound barrier at all, unfortunately. And he nearly died in the process because he was barely able to pull up, and everyone was screaming at him to bail out, but he refused to bail out. Next up, I don't need to talk about that, I don't think. Okay, so I'll talk about this in later videos, but the intake of the MiG-15bis is actually a good idea. So when designing the MiG-15 and, well, any aircraft after World War II, you'll notice during World War II a lot of the early aircraft had engines on their wings. Now, this isn't actually a bad idea. Technically speaking, as far as I'm aware, you actually get more drag from having your intakes underneath or to the sides of the fuselage than compared to the wings, while having your intake on the nose or on your wings actually has massive advantages, mainly being there's less drag apparently. Now, of course, the MiG-15bis couldn't break the speed of sound. It's pretty hard to do so when you have an intake in the nose, but you have no shock cone. I'll talk about shock cones in a later video, probably the MiG-21 video, because, well, the MiG-21 has the shock cone, and arguably the shock cone is the best intake design, but we'll talk about why people don't use it nowadays in the MiG-21 video. Oh, excuse me. So, I have the quick specifications. So, length is 10.1 meters basically, or 33 feet and 2 inches. Wingspan is 10 meters, 33 feet and 1 inch. Height is 3.7 meters, or 12 feet and 2 inches. Wing area is 20.6 meters squared, or 222 square feet. Wing area is quite important. You should take note of your wing area. More wing area you have, the more lift you have, and most likely the more turning abilities you'll have. Empty weight of 3,681 kilograms, or 8,115 pounds. Bear in mind that I'm pretty sure the Russians use kilograms and not pounds, and they use litres instead of gallons, and they use kilometres and meters basically. Kilometers an hour, and kilometers in height, or meters in height, and kilometers in distance, of course. Gross weight, so your average weight is about 5,044 kilograms, or 11,120 pounds. Fuel capacity. So this is where it gets a bit strange. So the fuel capacity, what Wikipedia says is technically wrong. So Wikipedia says 1,420 liters, but you have multiple tanks. You can, as far as if I remember right, you have your main tank, which is 1,420 liters. You have I believe it's two other tanks. I'm pretty sure it's 2 or 3 other tanks. You cannot read those tanks though. They're tiny. They're like 320 liters, 120 liters, and I can't remember what the other tank is if there is another tank. But you can't see those gauges. Oh yeah, and there's another 1,000 litre tank, I believe, 1,020 litres. You can't read those tanks, which is pretty damn annoying when you're flying the thing, because you're basically bingo fuel once you're starting to see your fuel gauge running down. You're going to have to go home at that point. Power plant. So the power plant is the Klimov KV-1. Centrifugal flow turbojet. It produces about 26.5 kilonewtons of thrust. Now, the MiG-17 produces, I believe, 22 point something kilonewtons of thrust, but it produces 32 kilonewtons of thrust with afterburner. Of course, they've had to make room for the afterburner, but so the engine's less powerful, but it's more efficient as far as I'm aware. So yeah. Max speed. Now, I've edited the Wikipedia results because it's wrong. It's Mach 0.92. And well, you can go over that, but you're not really flying at that point. You're more like in a controlled crash. Ferry range. I don't know if the ferry range on Wikipedia is correct. I haven't really tested it on DCS. But I have a feeling it's right. So ferry range is 2,520 kilometers. At 12,000 meters or 39,370 feet, which is pretty much your service ceiling. You're not really going to exceed 39,000 feet. I mean, you can go up to 50,000 feet, but that's when you're starting to like lose your fuel tank. Basically, you're not going to have much fuel left at that point. In miles, it's 1,570 miles. I'm going to stop using miles from now on. Just bear in mind, I'm going to use nautical miles. In this case, the nautical mileage would be 1,360 nautical mile range. This is with 2 600 litre tanks, or 160 US gallons, or 130 imperial gallons. I'm going to use US gallons just because I know US gallons, and I rarely ever see imperial gallons used, so... Service ceiling is 50,900 feet or 15,500 meters. We've already done rate of climb. I think I'm going to ignore wing loading as well. Thrust to weight ratio is 0.54. To put that into perspective, a modern aircraft is around 0.94, not 0.54, so or exceeding 1.0. Next is armaments, so 223mm, I'm not going to pronounce that name, but NR30 autocannons, which are in the lower fuselage, and they've got 80 rounds each, so you've got 160 rounds total. You also have a 137mm autocannon, or also known as an N37, again in the lower right fuselage, and it's got 40 rounds. Now, you can carry 2 100kg or 2 50kg bombs. That's 220 pounds or 110 pounds, FYI. Drop tanks. So, usually when you're ferrying, you're going to have your 600 litres or 158 US gallons tanks. But you can also have 300 litres or 79 US gallons or 250 litres or 66 US gallon tanks. You can also have rockets. I don't know what millimeter they are. I think they're around 80mm, if I remember right. Around 80 to 60mm rockets. You can have 2 8 times rockets, so 16 rockets total, or 8 rockets per pod. I should also talk about wing fences before I end this video. So, wing fences, basically, as you get to transonic speeds, or well, just get fast in general in an aircraft with a swept wing, the wind wants to go around your wings and not over your wings. Wing fences basically stop them going from around your wings, because what happens is the air hits your wing and then it wants to go along the edge of your wing, or yeah, basically like that. Wing fences basically catch that air and force it to go along the wing instead of around the wing. Of course, one of the big problems with wing fences is it causes quite a bit of drag, because of course you've got big flat things sticking out your wings. The Americans did something different, but I can't remember what the Americans did, but they, as far as I'm aware, they didn't use wing fences, or they did use wing fences, but they used something else as well. I don't think I should talk about vortex creators, but just on a separate note, the Concorde doesn't have wing fences, even though apparently it should have wing fences. This is because the Concorde uses vortex creators to basically make vortexes just above the wings that basically suck the wings up. So you're actually getting lift above the wings instead of below the wings, because of course you don't have enough wing area on the Concorde. I just thought that was a fun little fact to talk about. But yeah, I think that is all I need to talk about. Yes. And yeah, okay, so yeah. Okay, cool. Yes, I've definitely done everything right. And just correction on the fuel capacity, it is 1,410 litres. It's a 1,250 litre tank just behind the pilot, and it's a 160 litre tank which kind of wraps around the end of the jet nozzle. Anyway, guys, this has been your boy MiG-15bis. I shall be signing off. Okay, bye. Hey guys, it's your boy MiG-15bis here. You may notice that the audio is a little different. It's because I'm doing this after the fact of editing, which took way too long. But basically, I missed a couple stuff, and I thought I just did like a little more research after I'd done the video, which I want to add in. Some stuff I forgot, some stuff I just found interesting. So one thing you may notice while watching the video is that the videos that you have of dogfights in the cockpit, no one uses the gyroscope. Now, the point of the gyroscope is you can put in a range and put in the wing area of the aircraft, and once you get the circle touching both wings, basically that means you've got a perfect picture of the aircraft and you can shoot at it. The whole point of the gyroscope is that it basically tells you where your shots are going to land at that certain distance, which makes it good for like leading targets and such. The problem is that the gyroscope is too sensitive for fighter battles, because you can actually break your gyroscope by pulling hard maneuvers, so it was only ever used for bombers. The problem is this is one of the most early versions of the gyroscope. Of course, later World War II aircraft did start to use gyroscopes, but no one really ever used them because they completely threw off most pilots' aims, and they were too fiddly to deal with because you had to constantly change the range and your ranging could be incorrect and such. So lots of historians say that for pretty much any aircraft, the gyroscope is the easiest part to find pretty much brand new, because pretty much no pilots ever use them, so they're the most common part you can find for these aircraft. Talking briefly about the guns as well, at least for the 23mm rounds, they're actually not caseless rounds, so they do have to be ejected out of the aircraft, which means you are at risk of getting jammed and such. So I thought that was an interesting thing to talk about. Another thing is that I'll put up a picture on the screen, but the 23mm barrels, one of the barrels is shorter than the other. Now I can only assume this is for scatter shots, so if your accuracy is a bit off, your shorter barrel basically gets a wider hit area, so there's greater chance of at least a shot hitting where you want it to hit. That's all I wanted to add, guys. I also noticed that while I'm doing this video, it's very hard to find footage, and I'm starting to worry about the MiG-19, because the MiG-19 is going to be very hard to find footage of it, I'm assuming, especially the MiG-23. It's going to be easy to find MiG-21 footage, so I don't have to worry about that, but anyway guys, we'll get to it when we get to it. Okay then guys, bye!